welcome to Climate Control. My name is Whitney Pierce and I am with Partners in Prevention. Now, as you may know, Partners in Prevention's Unity and Diversity Committee have been doing really amazing things in our community. Specifically lately, they have had these small group discussions titled Longview Listens. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, these sessions have been postponed. However, we do understand that these are important and the conversations that were taking place need to be taking place in our community. Therefore, we have invited Mr. Terry Reese with us today, who has also hosted these Longview Listen sessions, to be with us to keep the conversation going because we know the topic of race relations is very important. Thank you, Terry, for being with us today. How are you?
I'm great, and you?
I'm great.
Nice to see you
so much. It's nice to see you as well. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. First of all, Terry, we want to know just some things about you. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been here in East Texas, Longview more specifically, for 6 years now. And prior to that, I was living and working in Chicago, out of Oak Brook, Illinois. And I was working for McDonald's Corporation, and I was a corporate executive. And I was responsible for a department that was called Training, Learning, and Development. And I had the entire globe. And at that particular time, we covered 119 different countries.
Wow.
So I had the opportunity to travel around the world. And what we did is we wrote the training curriculum for all of the restaurants and all the middle management people that run the restaurants. And prior to that, I was actually working in Michigan. And I was the vice president general manager for the Michigan region, where I covered 530 plus restaurants. And I was responsible for all of the operations and the training and the development and building new restaurants and all of that in Michigan. And then prior to that, I was working in South Africa as the vice president, and I was responsible for developing that country. So I went to South Africa to bring the McDonald's brand into South Africa. I spent 7 years there. Thoroughly enjoyed that position. And while I was there, I was also part of a team of corporate executives that had the responsibility for going around mostly in the United States, but a few of the international countries as well. And we had the responsibility of actually talking about and helping people to understand race relations within the organization. We had a special emphasis and focus on Black career development is what we did. And most recently, I've had the pleasure and the opportunity to work with Unity and Diversity on understanding race relations and bringing some training and some education into East Texas and more specifically here in Longview. And it's been a wonderful experience for me. I have thoroughly enjoyed it. It's an outstanding group to work with. And I think they've had some very positive impact here in the community. So it's been great. So that's a little bit about the long and short of me.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. So we're just going to dive right on into the discussion this morning. So racial reconciliation has been at the forefront of many conversations at the Unity and Diversity Committee. So based on your experience and expertise, do you have any suggestions on how to remain proactive about racial reconciliation?
Yes. Well, first off, I would say this to you, Whitney, that being proactive is very important, especially in the time that we're in right now. There's a lot going on, as you know. And obviously, what we want to make sure that we're doing is we're not putting Band-Aids on tough situations right now. So being proactive, staying proactive, and remaining that way is going to be so important to moving forward and ultimately being able to calm the waters, if you will, and take care of some of this unrest that we're feeling. Now, there's a couple of ways that I think that we need to go about doing that. One in particular is we've got to stay focused on solutions. You can see one of the things that has happened, I've seen a lot lately, has been the fact that there's been a lot of symbolic things that have been done. Now, I'm not saying that that's bad either. You know, having symbolic situations and things that are taking place is not all bad. But what we need to have is much more results-focused type actions that are taking place in order to be proactive and to maintain that way. Also, I think that when it comes to being proactive, there are some things that people need to understand and do when you're talking about race relations. There's some things that white people need to do, and there's some things that black people need to do as well. And let me give you an example, Whitney, of what I'm talking about. So when you think about being proactive, one of the things that has to happen is people are going to have to learn to make some sacrifices. And that's where it gets a little bit tough. Because when you talk about making sacrifices, specifically for something around race relations, people tend to shy away from that just a little bit. But here's some specific things I think that needs to happen in order to stay proactive. White people are going to have to listen to black people. Now, when I say that to mean this. A lot of times it's difficult for people to want to hear these conversations over and over and over again. In my experience, I've had white people say to me, you know, I've heard the story. How many more times do I have to hear the story? When can we move on? Isn't it time to move on? My response to that is this. There is no singular black experience. So listening to the stories, making the sacrifice to take the time to hear the different stories is going to help when people are working to become proactive, because you have a full understanding now of what the issues are, what the concerns might be or might have been, and that way you're able to remain proactive. Now there's some things I think that black people need to do as well. And black people need to be willing and make the sacrifice to talk to white people. In my travels and in my conversations with different people about race relations and conversations around race, I've had black people say to me, I don't want to talk to white people anymore. I've already had the conversation. How many times do I have to tell them? They don't understand. They don't listen. They'll never know what it's like to be black because they've never walked a mile in my shoes. My response to that is, that's all true. However, you have to make that sacrifice and be willing to have that conversation with white people, because if you're going to be proactive, you have to be able to educate and help people to understand where you've been, where you come from, what are the issues, what are the concerns, and why are these issues and concerns existing for you right now. So I think making a sacrifice, Whitney, is the key, the number one thing to being proactive as we look at moving forward with race relations.
Great. This is good stuff. If someone wanted to ask questions and know more about building positive race relations, how do you have these uncomfortable but necessary conversations?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And you know, I can sympathize and understand how people might feel very uncomfortable having that type of a conversation. Anytime you're talking about race and race relations, you're starting to dig deep and you're starting to touch some very sensitive issues and topics for people. So it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be very uncomfortable. But I would say this to anyone who is feeling that anxiety about having those kinds of conversations. Walk right into it. Don't be afraid. Go ahead and have the conversation. Now, I know that's easier said than done. So some things I think that can help as far as helping people to feel a little bit more relaxed when they're starting to, I guess, open up the conversation about race and really wanting to dig into that is, first and foremost, really understanding the fact that you have to set the tone early in the conversation. So letting people know that we're going to have a conversation about race. I might say some things that might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. You might say some things that might make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. But we're doing this all because we both want to learn something about each other as it pertains to our thought process around race and around race relations. The other thing that I would remind people of is this. If you think about our country and the history of our country and some of the things that have happened over the years, let me take you back a little bit. Think about what happened back in the 60s. Some things that helped to get the conversation going, the conversation started with good results was this. there were some people, a group of people, there was a person in particular, Dr. Martin Luther King, and his followers, that were willing to speak up and speak out about the unspeakable. And they weren't afraid to do that. People who are willing to speak up and speak out about the unspeakable are able to make change and have a huge impact. And we saw that happen in the 60s. If you kind of pull it forward a little bit, we saw the same thing or something similar happen with women's rights. There was people that were willing to speak up and speak out about the unspeakable. You can continue to kind of go through time. The same thing started to happen with gay rights. And the same thing is happening right now with what we are experiencing with Black Lives Matter, is that there's people that are willing to speak up and speak out about the unspeakable. So my message to people that are kind of sitting on the sidelines, a little bit concerned about those types of conversations, understand that historically, when we've done that, we've taken the liberty, if you will, to jump in there and have those conversations, there has been change, significant change, that has made things better. So, yeah, you're going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. You're not going to know exactly how to approach it, but I would say history has shown that when you're willing to speak up and speak out about these unspeakable things, good things start to happen.
Great advice. So let's just say if someone opens a conversation about race, does that make them a racist? And is there a good way to start a conversation about race?
It's a great question. You know, like I was saying earlier, it's a hard conversation to have for a lot of people because you're talking about some very sensitive, very private issues also when you think about that. So when you're starting to open up a conversation about race, I think it's very, very important that you set the right tone and you set the tone earlier. Like I was saying about making sure people understand that this conversation might be a little bit uncomfortable for you, it might be a little bit uncomfortable for me, but I think it's important that we have this conversation. Is a good way to kind of set the tone and get people kind of ready for the conversation that you're getting ready to get into. The other thing I think is very important, and I've experienced this a lot in my travels and working with different groups as they're trying to have these types of conversations, has been they start the conversation without a destination. They don't know where the conversation is going to go. And if you don't have a specific destination in mind in terms of where you want to take this conversation, it has a tendency to go off in all different directions. When you're talking about race, if the conversation starts to drift off and it goes into all these different directions, a lot of times what tends to happen is emotion starts to creep in. Once emotion starts to creep in, then things start to break down. So going into the conversation with a specific direction in terms of where you want to take it. Is your intent to educate someone? Is your intent to learn something yourself? Is your intent to help to put together some kind of a game plan or action steps that can help to make things better? But really understanding and knowing where you want to take that conversation is very important. And then I think the other thing that's important, and I've seen and experienced this a lot with my travels, is individuals who know how to bring the conversation to a concise close is also important to have in those difficult conversations. And a lot of people think that when you're talking about race, it has to be a conversation that's going on for, you got to spend an hour and a half, you got to spend 2 hours talking about it. Nothing could be further from the truth. The conversation, if you have a specific destination in terms of where you want to take that conversation, it might take 15 minutes. It might just take 10 minutes. Or it might take you an hour to get to your destination with regards to this conversation. But if you go into it thinking that it's going to have to be this long, drawn-out conversation, then you're going to find that it becomes much more difficult to manage the conversation. So being open, being frank, and then dealing with the facts from your perspective is also very important. You know, I mentioned that there's no singular Black experience. And too often people think that when they're starting to have this conversation, that the conversation is intended to speak for the entire race. That's not the intent of race conversations. Race conversations are designed to talk specifically about your experience. And the more that you can talk about your experience and the things that you felt, the things that you have believed, and how you've dealt with these situations, the better the conversation is going to be. If you're trying to articulate someone else's experience, then the conversation starts to get a little bit choppy. And then things start to break down because people start to ask you questions about something that you might have said that it isn't really been your experience. And when you're talking about race, it has to be about your specific experience. If I asked you, Whitney, a question about your race and growing up as a white female, I want to know specifically about you.
Yeah.
Not necessarily you talking to me about the white race, you're talking to me about your experience. And I should be open and willing to share that same type of experience in conversation with you. So understanding that and knowing that when you're in those kind of conversations helps to make them a little bit easier. I won't say that they're going to be 100% comfortable. Race relation conversations are never 100% comfortable because everyone's experience is so different.
Right.
But it does help if you can remember those points kind of going into these types of things.
That's great. Okay, so oftentimes there are some misconceptions that race relations centers around minorities. So in the first Longview Listens session, you led the group discussion surrounding stereotypes about the majority and minority. So why is it important for everyone to educate themselves on the topic of race relations?
Yes, you know, working with the diversity team here in Longview, one of the things I think we've all come to learn and understand is that we all can be better educated on race. And it's one of those things where education is key. If you're going to be, or if you're going to take care of some of the things that we've been talking about here earlier, if you're going to be proactive, if you're going to have those tough conversations, you've got to be educated on the subject matter. So it's very important, especially in the times that we're in right now, where there's a great need for people to have an understanding, a deep understanding about racism and race relations, experiences, and different things that have been happening and things that have been going on so that we can be proactive going forward. So education is key. There are so many different dynamics to race relations because of the different experiences that everyone has had. However, there is one, I guess, central point that seems to stick out, and it's the reason why in the sessions that I have led with the team, we've talked so much about these stereotypes, because a lot of the issues and the things that we've experienced growing up over time that have led to some of the problems and the challenges that we face today all have started from some stereotype that we've either heard, someone has taught us, or something that we believe, and that's carried through into our lives now. And now, all of a sudden, it's starting to show itself. And when these stereotypes start to show themselves and start to come out, this is when things start to really, really get difficult. And so our focus has been to educate everyone with regards to not just the textbook definition of stereotype, if you will, but stereotype from the standpoint of your own individual thinking, your background, what you know about it, and how it influences and affects the way you show up in your working and your adult life today. So education around race relations is key. You can't get enough of it. I've been doing this now for many, many years. And every time I have the opportunity to have a conversation about race, or whenever I've been working with the Longview Listens team here, and we've had a group of people in a room, I've always learned something new, something that I didn't know or I hadn't heard before about race and race relations. So education and the ongoing education is so important, and it's just key.
That growth mindset, we're always lifelong learners. I love
Absolutely.
that. So how can someone actively help with a solution to race relations in their everyday lives?
Well, I think if you're going to try to make it part of your everyday life, it has to become, there's certain things that have to be a lifestyle change for you. And what I mean by that is this. If you think about it, let's say in our working lives, we go to work every day, and typically we have a team of people that we're working with. And 9 times out of 10, we'll say, today I'm going to focus the team on making sure that we do X, Y, and Z so that we are much more productive and we can get a lot more things done in our given week, month, year, whatever the case might be. In order to be able to do the same thing with regards to race relations, it has to be part of a lifestyle change for us. So we have to approach it the same way we would as if we're talking about making a significant cultural change with our team. So one of the things that I think we need to do is this. If we can think about whatever situation we're getting ready to go into, so whether it's work, whether it's school, it might be going into, I don't know, maybe it's a civic group, organization that you're going to be spending time with, going into it with the mindset and thinking of how can I dispel any negative or racist type comments, behaviors, actions, or whatever that might have the tendency to creep into the conversation or the things that we might be doing here. And it should become second nature for us to be able to do that. Once it does, and it becomes second nature for us to recognize that and then deal with it right up front, then it becomes part of a solution and a working lifestyle change for us. And that's really where we need to be. It's a mindset change. It's a change of heart. It's also, we talked about the sacrifice. It's also making that sacrifice to say, I'm actually going to go in there and I'm going to do it. I'm going to focus on that. Very important, but very impactful as well.
Gosh, this is great. Well, it seems like we blew through that very fast, but you know what? This is all really great things, and I'm hoping that this impacted someone today. But before we end, I just wanted to ask you, is there anything that you want to recommend to viewers today to read upon, any reference material, anything that you want to suggest?
Yes, I get that question quite a bit, and I like getting the question because it tells me that people are concerned and they're interested about education, which what we were talking about just a minute ago. And I tell you, there's a lot of great books. There's a lot of good articles. Obviously, with the internet, there's a lot of good information on the internet. But there's one particular book that I have used over the years that has really been a big help to me in terms of understanding some of the different dynamics that goes on between the races. It's a book called Black and White, Styles and Conflicts.
Okay.
It was written by a gentleman by the name of Thomas Kochman. He's a black psychologist. And without giving away too much about the book, I'll tell you that it's very interesting because he approaches it from the standpoint of the differences between you being white and me being black. He looks at it as style. And he identifies the different styles. And he talks about how my style versus your style sometimes causes conflict when we are working or spending time together. And he also goes into a lot of good examples and tips and ways to be able to handle those conflicts once they do arise. It's a great book. It's an easy read. Easy paperback read, and I would strongly recommend for anyone who's looking to get a deeper understanding, if you will, about these cultural differences and why is it that there's such a clash, and why is it that we can't seem to just come together and operate as just human beings. Reading his book, he does a great job of clarifying that, so I would strongly recommend it. It's still in print on Amazon, so easy for people to get their hands on.
Yeah. Well, Terry, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of Climate Control today and for your insight. And we hope to be able to maybe do these in the future again.
My pleasure.
So we appreciate you. So to all of you viewers out there, we just want to thank you again for tuning in to Climate Control. If you want to be a part of these continuing conversations, please come to our monthly meetings for the Unity and Diversity Committee, which happen every first Monday of the month. And as well, if you want to be a part of anything else with Partners in Prevention, please visit our website at longviewtexas.gov/PIP. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a great day.